Good morning, YouTube. Monday, about 10 a.m. Running a little bit behind schedule. Dropped Charlie off rather early this morning. Came home to get ready to go out. And then got caught up watching Joey Ingram's podcast with Garrett Adelstein. I really enjoy a lot of Joey Ingram's podcasts, as well as just other things he puts out. As I mentioned before, I love a lot of content on YouTube. So sometimes I'll get caught up watching things. In this case, it was this one. I've been watching it for a few days now. It's pretty lengthy. I think this episode in particular is great. He has just kind of like a lot of mindset stuff and just a great approach in general to life in poker. I think he imparts, like I said, a couple of different points of wisdom and just generally seems to have it down. Not to mention he's obviously just a killer at poker. And, you know, as someone who kind of aspires to just get better and better every day, I think it's cool to just kind of see how he thinks about things. So I'll try and link that, hopefully above. It'll be on some side or another. I'll give a link to that podcast, and you can check that out. Otherwise, we're on our way to the casino. Most likely going to be playing 3-5 as usual, 1K cap. There's not much else that's usually running during the days, as I've mentioned before. Let's get it.
5 hours later.
We are back at it. Got a lot of fun, interesting hands and a lot of them to go through today, so I'm probably going to try to describe them as quickly as possible, get to the point on most of them. Pretty early on in the session, if not within like the first orbit, I get pocket kings under the gun. I open to $20. There's a lady who calls me who I've played with a couple of times over the last month or so. She plays fairly straightforward, relatively tight. I've seen her just run like God like the 3 times that I've played with her. So she calls and another player in the cutoff calls. The flop comes 10-7-4 with 2 hearts. I lead for 40 into 60. She calls and the player behind her calls. The turn is an offsuit queen, which I obviously don't love because queen 10 gets there, but at the same time I feel like I have to keep betting here. There are a lot of hands I can get value from by continuously betting. I'm going to be getting called by the hard draws that have straight draws as well, like Jack 9 of hearts, 6-5 of hearts, as well as all the combinations of queen high flush draws that have now turned top pair. Similarly, it might just be like if it's a hand like ace queen of hearts, they're obviously just going to get it in on the turn. Both of these players are relatively short. She's playing like 320 and he is playing, I think, around 400. I decide to now bet $120 and she jams for 200 more. I don't love it, but like I said, I think there's just a lot of hands that she can have here that I can still have beat. I have the king of hearts, so it kind of sucks because I don't. I blocked the king queen of hearts, but I think maybe queen jack of hearts she still might jam here. Probably not though, given what I've seen from her. The player behind her folds. The river's the jack of hearts, which is obviously just a terrible card because now I don't even beat the flush draws. She ends up having queen 10 offsuit, so I lose right off the bat. A fairly sizable pot. Not much I can do here, I don't think. Even if I check this turn, chances are I'm going to be getting it in against her. I guess I could just check. She might even just over jam the turn because she does these really weird things when she has big hands. So I might be able to find some like ridiculous hero fold. But nonetheless, I think it's pretty standard here to just be betting turn again and having to call off her jam, which is fairly small. This next hand happens shortly thereafter. I get king queen of hearts in the cutoff. I open to 20. The big blind is the only one who calls me. The flop comes 10-5-3 with 2 hearts. He check calls 30. I actually think I should bet like 25 because after the rake, the pot's only about $35. I think this is just too big of a bet on this flop. Turn is the 8 of hearts, so I make the second nuts, and now he leads 60 into me. He's playing, I think, about 350. I think sometimes here I'll just call, but given that he has like a fair amount behind, I like just raising and trying to get it in against his small flushes. Similarly, sometimes people just like tend to spaz because they just don't really think you have a hand. I think at 160, he ends up jamming in 350. River's an offsuit 4, and he has ace 4 offsuit with the ace of hearts. So he ended up picking, I think he flopped the gut shot because I actually don't remember the flop exactly, but I think he flopped the gut shot on the 10-5-3 board with his ace 4. And then obviously turns the hard draw, leads into me, and then rejams, I guess, thinking I could maybe make some hero folds with 1 pair. Just a big proponent of fast playing hands. I do a lot of bluffing and stuff when I think people are weak. In this spot when he leads the turn, it looks kind of goofy. So I just tend to fast play hands because I'm doing the exact same thing with my bluffs when I'm trying to just outplay people. So I like just raising here, making a small raise, because if he does end up having like hearts, we're just going to get it in. After winning that hand with the flush against the ace high flush draw, I'm about even at this point, and now I pick up aces under the gun. I make my standard open to 20. We go 7 ways to the flop. Oh yeah, these games are great. 7 ways to the flop. Flop comes ace, king, 4, rainbow. Obviously, I'm loving the fact that I flop a set multi-way, but on this kind of board texture, it's just going to be hard for anybody to have anything. The blinds check. I'm not a proponent of checking in these spots because I think in a loose, passive game, this is just going to check through a lot, and I don't want to give a free card to the gut shots, the 5-3s, the possible 5 deuces, and obviously the Broadway gut shots, which I think people are going to have a lot here. I just think it's like too obvious if I check here and then on the later street I try piling in a bunch of money. I'd rather just bet and hope that somebody either has like some wonky 2-pair here, like ace 4, king 4, or it's likely that it's just going to go folds through a lot. I end up betting 50 into 140. It folds to like the cutoff, who seems like an action player. He calls, and the big blind calls as well. Turn is the queen of spades, so now there's 2 spades. I have the ace of spades. The ace is offsuit on the flop, so you'd figure that most likely someone wouldn't have picked up a flush draw on the flop unless it's specifically like jack 10 of spades, or possibly like 4x of spades, 4-5 of spades, like calling with bottom pair and picking up a flush draw. The big blind checks. As I mentioned, I think a lot of gut shots here might continue, especially for this small bet. We're all very deep. We're like 1,500 deep. So I know personally I'm probably not folding jack 10 here on this rainbow board for such a small bet when we're really deep, because I'm going to be hoping the player could have something like aces, kings, or ace king, and I can win a big pot. I elect to check in this spot for deception. I think that if I'm going to go like 2 barrels here, there's just not many hands that can be calling me down unless it's like specifically king, queen, ace, queen, and those hands are probably going to be giving me money on the river anyway. By checking this turn, I kind of disguise my hand. The last player can, turn his hand into a bluff, whatever he happens to have. And similarly, if someone is calling me down with like a king, they might end up rivering like trip kings, and I could win a big pot. I'm not, obviously the only real things that I'm afraid of are allowing gut shots to get there for free. Like if someone happens to have like king 10 or king jack, and now this turn checks through, they can end up getting there with the runner. But I think possibly if I bet this turn, those hands might continue anyway, so it's not too big a deal. I'm not really afraid of those hands anyway. I check. Unfortunately, the last player, who I'm hoping is going to put in a bet here, decides to check as well. The river's the 9 of spades. The backdoor flush gets there. The big blind checks again. At this point, I'm going for value. As I said, I have the ace of spades, so I don't expect anyone here to have ever backdoored the flush, unless it's specifically something like 4 or 5 of spades. I bet 75. The cutoff folds fairly quickly. The big blind goes into the tank. He ends up showing a king and ends up folding. I think this hand, isn't particularly interesting, but it kind of goes to show you where I think, you should always just be betting your big hands as well as your bluffs. If this is a board that's going to be hitting your range a lot, then you should be betting it whether you have it or not. As you can see, it's just hard really for people to be continuing in a spot where you haven't been 3-bet pre-flop on a board such as this. This next one, it's a doozy. Under the gun opens to 15. He's playing about 1,300. The whale, who's next to act, was playing like 650. Calls 15. I'm in the cutoff with 4 deuce offsuit. Generally a fold, but as I've mentioned before, I love playing hands in position against opponents who I want to be playing hands with. Both of these guys are guys I want to be playing hands with. So I call 15. I think the blinds call. We go like 5 ways to a flop, which comes ace, jack, 3 with 2 spades. I have the 4 of spades, so I flop the nut gut shot to the wheel, as well as a run-in 4-high flush draw. Goes check, check. Now the pre-flop opener bets 40, I think, into 75. The action player calls. I'm not going anywhere with a nut gut shot. Obviously, if I hit the 5 of spades, I'm not going to love it, but I do have position, and more importantly, I noticed that both players behind me are already motioning to muck. And we go 3 ways to a turn, which is the 8 of spades. Now it goes check, check to me. This, as usual, is a green light for me to be turning my hand into a bluff. Obviously, I have 4 high. So I elect to bet 110. The under the gun player folds pretty quickly. As I've said before, I like attacking capped ranges. I think when they both check here, they're both fairly likely to not have flushes, and I am. So I bet 110. The under the gun player folds, and now the action player calls fairly quickly. The river is a small spade. I don't remember exactly what it was, like the 6 of spades, something like that. So I end up making a 4-high flush. And now he leads into me for like 135, which is a really small bet. He's playing like 450 now at this point, or 440, something like that. I've seen him do one too many goofy things to be folding a flush here at this point. I think he could be, you know, turning flopped sets into bluffs, two pairs into bluffs. He can definitely be flattening this flop with two pair, trying to make a boat by the river, and then on the river being scared, not knowing what to do in betting. I think when he bets the sizing, it's fairly obvious that he doesn't have like a big flush. I think if he had a king-eye flush, he'd be betting much bigger. He'd be going for larger value. I just know this player. And so when he leads here, I've just kind of decided, A, I'm never folding to the bet. So when I'm never folding to the bet, I obviously don't want to be calling and losing to him if he has like 9-10 of spades or something like 9-high flush draw or something middling that he doesn't know what to do with, so he wants like blocker bet. Because I think he could be doing this as well, like turning a small flush, check calling, and then on the river being like, oh crap. So I feel like he's got enough for me to jam and have him fold. He thinks I'm fairly nitty. I tend to play hands against him when I'm raising. I try not bluffing him unless I'm in a specific spot like this where I feel like he has a capped range. So I jam, and he's just like, oh man, if you have the king of spades here, like congratulations. And he side calls. He's having queen 10 offsuit, queen of spades. Calls his turn with a queen eye flush draw, not drawing to the nuts. Also a double belly buster straight draw, which could be just stone dead. I mean, obviously a very unlucky river for me, because if the river's a brick, he's just check folding. I guess if he makes his straight with the king or the 9, maybe he's leading into me, or perhaps he's just check calling off like his 450 or whatever it was that he had. Obviously I hate his play. I don't really know what he's doing, but that's why they're action players. I love the action. I've told myself to stop bluffing rivers when I think people are betting for value. I thought it was possibly betting for value, but I just couldn't really help myself because, like I said, it felt like he could end up having a hand like two pair or a set that he's turning into a bluff. So I just wasn't folding. And if I'm not folding, I think I enjoy jamming there significantly better. Obviously, a bad miscalculation on my part on how wide of a range he has here if he is calling the turn with queen 10 with the queen of spades out of position, you know, versus me specifically, because it's just, I don't really know what his best case scenario is. I guess it's rivering a spade and getting me to bluff jam. That was his best case scenario, and it worked out for him, so kudos to him. Shortly after bluffing off in that hand, the action player who aforementioned called me with queen 10. He's a straddle. I have 10-8 offsuit in middle position, folds to me. I open to 30. I'm going to be attacking his blind here because I know he's calling super wide, and I just want to be playing hands with him. As I mentioned numerous times before, I think this is the key to poker, playing players that you want to play against in position. So I open to 30. The small blind calls, and he calls. We go three ways to a flop, which comes ace 5-7 with the 5-7 hearts. It goes check, check. I bet 40 into 90. And they both call. When they both call, I'm pretty much done with the hand here. I have no real equity. I think I might have like the 10 of hearts or the 8 of hearts. But I think when they're both calling, A, either one of them has a hard draw, or B, one of them's got an ace, and I'm just not really going to be getting them to fold. The turn is the ace of hearts, which again is awful card because aces just aren't going to be folding, and the flush has now got there. It goes check, check to me. I check back, essentially giving up on the hand. The river is an offsuit 10. Now the small blind bets 40. Really small bet. The straddler folds, and when he bets this sizing, I actually contemplate just heroing with the river 10, but I don't think I'm ever going to have the winner here. I think he could be A, betting an ace here for kind of like blocker / value, not knowing what to do with it, and similarly could be doing this with some flushes. He's playing about like 350 total, so if I am going to raise and jam, it's like 300 more, and you know, that's what we did before. We're going to try it again. I jam, and he goes into the tank. I feel pretty confident he's just folding here. It feels like he's got some like weak made hand, like I said, a small flush, possibly an ace, and I just don't expect him to call off here very often. He goes in the tank, looks like he's folding, then it starts looking like he's calling, puts like a calling chip forward. So then I'm just like, oh crap, I'm gonna get called twice here bluffing. Finally, after thinking about it for a while, he folds and lets me know that he folded a 9-high flush. Gotta let him know, you know, that's a good fold, man. I had a boat. It's a good fold. If it's not obvious up until this point, the game is playing very, very loose. Opens are just getting larger. Nobody's folding. Then shortly after that, I get ace-king offsuit. Now I pump it up to 45. We're starting to make it 8, 9, and 10x pre-flop in limp pots because literally people just aren't folding pre-flop. So when that happens, start increasing your bet size with your value hands. If people aren't going to be folding to your large opens when you have value hands, just make it bigger and bigger and bigger. You know what I mean? Like charge them for playing you pre-flop. So I make it 45. We end up going 3 ways to a flop, which comes ace, queen, 4 with 3 clubs. Small blind just open jams like 400 into like 4 of us. I think it was 4 or 5 ways for 45. Open jams 400. Now the action player, who limp calls 400, goes fold to me. At this point, I was pretty sure I had a black king, and my immediate thought was like, all right, I hope I have the black king, because I kind of want to gamble. I'm stuck, and more importantly, I think I'm just going to have the best hand here a lot when I have ace king. I look back, it is a black king, and it's the king of spades. I just don't think I could be ever calling here. The small blind was doing this a lot, like when he flopped flushes, so I think he can very well have some like middling flopped flush here that he's just jamming into the field because he's scared of a club coming off. It ends up coming like brick and an offsuit 4. He has like 6 deuce of clubs for a flop 6 high flush, and the action player has queen 4 for flopping bottom 2, ends up rivering a boat. Yeah, we're gambling. We're gambling at Lucky Chances Casino. At this point, I'm stuck around 1100. Obviously, a couple of missed bluffs. I haven't made any hands. Nothing really has just been going my way. I've just been kind of whiffing with my hands and losing. Obviously, I had that one failed bluff. I lost with the pocket kings against the queen 10. So a bit of a seesaw. Stuck 1100. The floor asks me if I want to play 5-10. Generally speaking, I don't play it lately because it starts around like 5 o'clock, and so obviously, or like 4:30, and I just don't have the time to play. But he'd asked me around 2 o'clock, and I'm like, yeah, sure, if we can get it going soon, let's go. They end up being able to get it to go at 3 o'clock, so I'm of course all about that. Stuck a bunch, and all the action players are going to the 5-10 game, so there's just really no way I'm not going to be taking the game when that's the case. We jump in the game, and one of the biggest action players straddles the first hand, so pretty quickly it's agreed upon that we're just going to play a mandatory straddle game, 5-10-20, which is, you know, perfect because I'm stuck a bunch, and I want to be playing big with these specific players. Waiting now for dinner. Got in a nice little order. So let's get into the hands from 5-10-20 no limit. Thankfully, the plan here was to run good, and you know, when that's the plan, that's what we're going to do, of course. Early on in the session, there are a bunch of limpers for 20. An action player makes it 120. I pick up ace king offsuit on the button, and I elect to 3-bet now to, I think, 440, 300 more. Folds back to him, he calls. Flop comes like king 9 deuce rainbow. He checks, and I down bet, I think like 340, 360, something like that, and he folds pretty quickly, saying that he made a pretty loose call pre-flop. So we win that one, fairly nice. And then there's another hand where he opens to 60. I have ace king offsuit once again, but this time he's we're both in earlier position, and the player in the straddle is someone who I want in the hand. He's one of the action players. I don't really want to be locking him out in this spot. I think it's just often going to fold through behind me. There's really not that much money in the pot, and obviously I get to play a good thinking player in position, but he's not really who I want to be isolating here. So I think by like calling in position, I get to disguise my hand, and I'm going to get some of the action players into the pot because they were all yet to act. In the previous hand where I had ace king, they had all limped into the pot, so I think that, you know, they're quite likely to still be like getting out of line here when I'm 3-betting the ace king. So anyway, I call the 60, and we end up going, I think, 4 ways to a flop, which comes 5-4 deuce. It goes check, and now the pre-flop opener checks, and I elect to bet my ace king high here. I do have the gut shots to straight. I assume my aces and king are also live quite often. I don't expect somebody to have a 3 here. Because I just called pre-flop, my hand looks, you know, pretty uncapped. I could have a lot of overpairs here, and when it goes check check to me, I think I'm just gonna have the best hand here with ace king high quite often. I bet 100, and I think it was 60, and now the player behind me folds. The straddler, who's the action player, he calls, and the pre-flop opener calls. When they both call, I think it's pretty interesting. I'm not really sure exactly what I think the pre-flop opener has here to be overcalling. Maybe he himself has like a hand like ace king or ace queen high, but I would think he would just fold this flop once I bet and get a call. The straddler, obviously, I think can have a wide range of hands here. Turn is a 5, goes check check to me. I decide to check it back, and I'm just thinking like king of clubs, king of clubs, king of clubs, boom, king of clubs. Now the action player leads for 340. The player to my right like snap calls a 340. I pretty much snap call. When I call, the guy to my right, the good thinking player, is just like, well, I can't win. He ended up having ace queen high. the action player in the straddle bet the river with a deuce, so he was obviously not beating that anyway. He wouldn't expect, I guess, him to be turning a deuce into a bluff. But anyway, that was a pretty nice large pot for me to pick up in this spot with the ace king high, rivering the king, and you know, rivering the guy who did flop a deuce. Things are kind of smooth sailing. I've been running pretty good. I think at this point I might be up around 1,000. We're ready to get to the last hand of note for the session. I think previously I said I was up 1,000. What I meant by that was that I had gotten out of the $1,100 hole and was probably up about 1,000 total for the day. So I was up probably around 2K in the 5, 10, 20 game. With about an hour left before I'd have to be leaving, folds to, again, the action, the good thinking player to my right. As I've said before, he's kind of spaz. He does a lot of really interesting things. He's by far the one player in the game who is doing tricky, weird, interesting things. He opens to 60. I have king 10 of clubs, I think either on the button or in the cutoff. Obviously, I can 3-bet here, but I just don't really love it. He's calling a lot of 3-bets. He likes doing 4-bets. I decided to just flat in position. Probably a mistake. I think this hand probably plays better just as a 3-bet pre-flop to isolate and play against him. But as I mentioned, he's a good thinking player. I try to not get too out of line often against him because he can do some pretty crazy, interesting things and, you know, make it pretty hard on you. So I call. The big blind calls, the straddler calls. We go 4 ways to a flop, which comes, I think, 10-5-3 or 10-5-4 with 2 clubs. So I flop top pair, second nut flush draw, second best kicker on the top pair. Obviously, pretty damn good hand. It was check, check. Pre-flop opener, now that's 160. I'm not going anywhere. I don't think there's any reason to be raising. The straddler looked like he wanted to bet the flop. He's a pretty tight player, does some like weird things. So when he like kind of tanked and thought about like leading the flop, I thought he could have like a flush draw here himself, or just, I don't know, have some like weird strong hand. So I don't really love this spot, but anyway, obviously I'm not going anywhere. I call 160. Now the small blind folds, which is pretty interesting because of the hand that we end up finding out that he has later on, which I'll mention later. And now the guy, the straddler who I had mentioned that was kind of tanking on the flop, he ends up like tank folding. Turn is an offsuit ace, which obviously I hate. It's actually the ace of hearts, which brings now 2 clubs and 2 hearts. He ends up checking, which I like. I like the fact that he checked. I would expect him to keep barreling with his aces. But at the same time, I think he can get tricky here with some aces. So once he checks, I think about possibly turning my hand into a bluff if for, say, he has a hand like jacks or queens. And also, I just end up tanking because I wanted to look like I had somewhat of a decision. I don't really want to just snap check back and make it look like I just have a 10 all day, which is going to give him the green light to bomb like all rivers. River ends up being, so the flop was, let's possibly correct this. It ends up being like the 6, offsuit 6, so a straight gets there. It was like 7-8 or 8-9. I think in this case it was 8-9, but I probably misquoted the flop, which was actually 10-5-6 instead of 10-4-5. So like one straight gets there, as well as like possibly like the open ender on the flop, but I just don't expect him to be having that for a hand pre-flop. And now he ends up bombing 560. Crap. I expect him to just do this a lot because he understands that my range is capped as hell. I can't have that strong of a hand to be checking back this turn. It looks like I hate the ace. And with all of this put together, I think it looks like he's bluffing here a lot. But similarly, I think he's going to do this exactly with his value hands because, A, he's going to expect that I can have some missed flush draws here. And if I have a missed flush draw, I'm just never calling anyway or never really doing anything anyway. He just knows that my hand here, I think, is a lot of times going to be a 10. He's stuck. I think he's trying to go for max value. And this spot for me is just really, really close. It's unfortunate because I think if it's any other player in this game, it's I think a fairly easy fold. Like no one really is potting here as a bluff. It's just this specific opponent, which really sucks when you're playing against good thinking players in big games. It's really close for me. I'm getting I think it's 2-1. The question is, do I think he's bluffing like 33% of the time? It's close. I think for sure he can be. I could just fold, lock up the win of like $500 or $600 at this point, because as I said, for the session, as I said, I lost like a couple of hands towards the end. I think at this point I'm up like $500 or $600. It's really close. It's a coin flip. I think he could be bluffing here a lot, and I just end up deciding to hero. I think that he's going to be bluffing here a fair percentage of the time because of my hand looking as capped as it is. I expect him to just do this with all of his air balls. Similarly, I think he could even be doing this with a hand like Jacks, going for value because he realizes I just most likely don't have an ace myself. So it's just his range is super like wide here, and I decided to hero. Unfortunately for me, he ends up coming up with the ace-jack of clubs. So he had me in really bad shape on the turn. Obviously, he had the nut flush draw on the flop. I had the best hand with the 10. Thankfully, a club didn't come because this pot plays probably similar in size. I think if the turn's a club, he's betting. I'm obviously just calling. On the river, if he bombs, I don't see myself ever really folding to him because he could be valuing worse. So I'm fairly lucky it wasn't a club. Obviously, unlucky that it was an ace. Really, really unlucky for me, though, is that the small blind called a raise with ace-10 and somehow found a fold on this flop with ace-10. If he ends up calling, he wasn't even that deep, so I don't really know how he folds. He even said he was like really mad at himself because he just never folds you like 99% of the time, especially who he is in particular. There's just like him folding top in this situation just never ever happens. I guess he just felt like we were both really strong or something and decided to make like a big hero fold. So really unlucky for me because on this turn of an ace, 3 ways, I'm just not going to pay off. Maybe the turn even gets bet by the ace-jack of clubs, and now I'm going to get squeezed out of there when the ace-10 has 2 pair. So it really sucked for me on multiple levels. End up losing that hand. I played like a little bit longer, like 30 minutes before I have to go. I thought I was about even. Fortunately, when I cashed out, I ended up losing about like $67 on the day. Obviously, just a great outcome given that I was stuck at like $1,120 heading to 5, 10, 20 no limit. So I can't really complain. Just unfortunate that I kind of had this like swingy session towards the end where I lost a couple of fairly sized pots to end up losing like $1,000 back in that game. Still, really fun. I enjoy playing, the big stakes no limit. It's 5, 10, 20. I don't get to play very often because of the fact that it starts later on the day when it does start. And so it was nice kind of butting heads with some good thinking players and similarly some really action players. Anyway, that's all. Arriving right now to pick up Charlie. Hope you guys enjoyed this analysis, and we'll be back at it again tomorrow. Have a good night, guys.